vaccine passport comes to New York. So what do you need to know before you book the travel?
Kurt, the cyber guy, joins us live from Los Angeles International Airport. Kurt, so people hear a vaccine passport. Sounds a little wild. Give us the latest.
Yeah, it is right here. Jedediah, good morning to you. Pete and Will, welcome to Los Angeles International Airport. We're actually, the first flight of the day will take off in about 40 minutes from here. And here's the deal about U.S. travel out of this country, as well as getting around inside of our country. New York, one of the first with Excelsior Pass. And then you've got a whole slew of other health passes that we're going to see grow and grow and grow. But the big problem is there's no standardization. And here's what's going to happen when you want to later, say, go to Europe and it starts to open up and they require a pass. They want a standardized pass. This country doesn't have that. American is using right now one that they call Verifly. That seems to be going big. Common Pass seems to be used, like I'm going to go to Hawaii in a week and a half. In May, they're going to start using that so that I won't have to spend that money of $170 to $250 just to get a COVID test to prove 3 days before I travel that I don't have COVID and that I indeed am vaccinated. These are really promising technologies. The U.S. is really late to the game on this one. But I will say, in terms of travel, it is cooking. It is heating up. Summer bookings up 60% according to an app called Hopper that tracks travel bookings. And also showing up at airports, just like you were saying, 239,000 people a year ago last Thursday, compared to about 1.4 million people, 1.4 million people last Thursday, 239,000 people a year ago Thursday. A lot of people are hitting the road. I've also signed on, booked my mother a trip to Italy. The cost was remarkably low. The travels for later in the year, September, October, we're rolling the dice. Why? Because this Wednesday will be the last day for most major carriers for you to book a trip that's non-refundable, non-changeable, and be able to change that if your plans change without incurring a fee. So now's the time to book that travel, but you got to keep your eye on the ball that you can unplug it if things aren't opened up where you wanted to go.
Kurt, real quick, I mean, a lot of us have been flying this entire time. We're thankfully moving toward the back end of COVID-19, at least the initial reaction vaccines. You've got natural immunity. Are passports going to be mandatory? Are you going to need one of those to travel?
I think you're going to see it to go into buildings, to go into venues. Certainly to travel, once you get to the destination, to go into the sites, yes, the answer there.
Wow. Wow. Okay, there might be some resistance to that. We'll see how far and wide it really goes. Really, I mean, absolutely. Kurt, the cyber guy, though, thanks for breaking it down for us. Thanks, we appreciate it. All right, still ahead, President Trump is reportedly so frustrated with Joe Biden's handling of the border crisis, he could soon head to our southern border himself. More on that at the top of the hour.
We saw cages after cages after cages of little girls, of little boys.
We begin this hour with a Fox News alert. Republicans tour the southern border for a first-hand look at the crisis.
New shocking video reveals extreme overcrowding at makeshift facilities housing migrants.
This video was taken within the last 24 hours as the number of children in federal custody jumps to nearly 1,000, and the length of time well beyond the parameters of what is deemed acceptable. Welcome to this 7 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time edition of Fox and Friends on this Saturday morning. I'm joined by Jed and Will, and we're glad that you're here. And it's one of those mornings, Will, we were sitting this morning talking about, it's one of those mornings, there's so much news and so many different aspects and angles to news. We're struggling to make sure we get to everything. We will do the best we can, but we start south of the border because, Jed, that press conference yesterday was unlike most you see. Most are very scripted. They're very staged. Passions are a bit measured. There, it was almost a couple dozen senators right there on the border, fresh back from seeing it firsthand, viscerally impacted by the images they've seen and almost taunting the reporters in front of them, saying, we saw what you can't because the administration won't let you see it. And it is racked and stacked. Buildings meant for a couple of hundred people are housing a couple of thousand kids in what would be classified under Donald Trump as cages. But of course, we can't use that term anymore because it's compassionate if it's Joe Biden. And they say there's nothing compassionate about this. And it was all because policies changed on day one that said that sent a signal, America is open. We'll even put arrows for you. Come on in.
And how could you not be viscerally impacted when you see these images? I mean, I'm feeling that impact here, and I'm, saying this from New York. I'm not even on the ground there. These individuals went out there, and you have to give a lot of credit to these GOP senators who knew that there was a problem here and who also knew that journalists weren't being allowed to do their job. So they needed to get down there, and they needed to show people visually what's happening to make people feel like, hey, we need to do something. We need to make phone calls. We need to pressure our lawmakers. This is not a sustainable situation. This is a heartbreaking situation. I mean, look at these people. They're piled on top of each other. It's despicable, the conditions. So I do think it's sad, though, that they were forced to do that, these GOP senators, that they were forced to go down there and expose this because the media is not being allowed in by the administration, and the administration's not giving answers, Will.
Pete, you said if these images emerged under a Trump administration, it would undoubtedly be characterized as cages. You're right. I would also suggest if these images emerged during spring break from a red state or during an American football game or during a Trump rally, they would undoubtedly be called super spreader events as well. But instead, what we're seeing is not enough to amount to a crisis, according to the Biden administration. I asked you during our morning meeting, how do they rationalize that? How do they rationalize saying this is normal, seasonal, this isn't a big deal? How do they look at the numbers and make that work? And there really isn't a good answer for how they're able to explain this away as a normal seasonal surge. I asked, by the way, a Daily Caller reporter who's been spending some time down there on the southern border, Jorge Ventura, what he sees and whether or not it's real.
As soon as I actually arrived to the airport in McAllen, migrants were being flown out. When I checked into my hotel, migrants were actually staying at the hotel that I was staying at. The few hours that I was on the ground reporting, over 300 migrants were apprehended on Wednesday night. And one thing that we noticed while reporting on the ground is that these migrants actually wanted Border Patrol to apprehend them. We actually ran into migrant groups that told us, hey, can you point us into the direction of Border Patrol? And this is actually, like I said, it's a real crisis. It's going on in real time. Border Patrol, it has all their hands full, and they need as much help as they can. It's very odd to see that there's really like no urgency from this administration when they're asked about this, and they don't even have a set date when they're going to come down to the border and see this issue.
Will, I don't know that they'll be able to rationalize it much longer. Usually they can count on the cover of the Democrat-friendly press who will do their work for them. In this case, if you're being blocked, you have a professional obligation to try to get in and tell a story, which maybe creates a bit of a tiny incentive for these reporters, who should have one anyway, to maybe report the honesty of what's happening at the border. Usually Dems can say what they want, and the media reports it as fact. Senator Lindsey Graham was one of those senators there at that press conference, and he called out the fact that the woman in charge of the border response, Kamala Harris, the vice president, doesn't have a plan to visit. Listen.
The Border Patrol said there is no end to this. So, Vice President Harris, this is your job to fix. I promise you I will work with you, but you cannot possibly understand your job unless you come here. The last thing we're going to do is introduce a resolution praising the men and women of the Border Patrol and the Customs Department. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan 56 times. Our soldiers serve in incredibly tough conditions. What we're asking the men and women of the Border Patrol to do is inhumane.
So this is a key point about Vice President Kamala Harris, because there's been a lot of confusion about what her role will actually be. What is she in charge of? What is she not in charge of? Well, Simone Sanders, senior advisor and spokeswoman for VP Harris, weighed in on her role in solving the border crisis. This is what she said. I will just reiterate that the vice president is not doing the border. President Biden asked the vice president to take on the diplomatic efforts to address the root causes of migration. This is not work that will be addressed overnight. This is a challenging situation, but it's diplomatic work that needs to be done. So here the excuse seems to be that she is in charge of migration, stemming the migration at the southern border. This is a long conversation. We're going to get to the root cause of it. That doesn't really change for me, though, the fact that she should be there and see what's happening, because there is the incentive to stop this is to look at what's happening. And I think if you're going to be in any leadership capacity with respect to any aspect of the border, anything that relates to border security or relates to the current conditions that you see on the ground there, you got to go and see it and at least show your face and have these conversations with people who are dealing with this day to day. So I just don't find that to be a valid excuse, what was represented right there.
Well, actually, I think it's beginning to make some sense to me, Jedediah. I, too, was confused by the phrase, the vice president is not doing the border. So she's not focusing on what's happening at the southern border. She's rather going to focus on the root causes of the migration. And now I'm beginning to get it.
Right.
You see, if Kamala Harris can explain to people from Central America, the same way that she's explained to Americans, that America is an inherently racist, unjust place where people walk around maskless at all time, and it's a very dangerous place. If she can just explain to Central Americans the same way she's explained to Americans that this is an awful place, then she might be able to stem the tide of migration. In fact, we might have a perfect match on our hands, folks. We might just have the perfect ambassador to stem migration. Somebody else, though, might go to the southern border. And Jason Miller, who was on the Michael Berry show, said it will be former President Trump. Listen to this.
Joe Biden stood on that debate stage with the Democrats and even reiterated his belief in the general election, saying that he supported citizenship for 11 million undocumented folks. Well, guess what? That's like putting up a signal flare of 4th of July firework proportions to the entire Western Hemisphere for everyone who wants to come to the United States to come.
Do you foresee the president making a visit?
You know, we discussed that recently. I could see him doing that soon. I think President Trump wanted to let Joe Biden go and fail on his own before he goes and steps in on that. I think there's a very fine line between calling someone out on the policies and then appearing to do something that's showboating. Not immediately, but I could see a trip at some point in the future here. But it is something that President Trump is really concerned about.
Will, it's such an important point. I mean, we'll see if the president goes down there. Certainly, he will continue to reiterate that his policies had been successful in stemming this tide, and we're actually humanitarian in the process. But the point you made is such a good one. It is the same Democrats who think America is systemically racist that think our doors should be wide open and everyone should come, and don't understand why everyone wants to come to the country that's so evil and so systemically racist. Let's stick with that word racist for a second on another story, because recently you've heard both the president, the vice president, and Senate Democrats talk about how the filibuster, that Senate institution, is racist, ultimately. But a lot of people are pushing back and saying, well, if that's what you think, then how complicit have you been in racism for so many years and not that long ago? Let's listen to Senator Joe Biden, then Senator Joe Biden, talk about some calls in 2005 to end the filibuster. Listen to this. Oh, it's a read. Sorry. All right. It's not only a bad idea, it upsets the constitutional design and it disservices the country. No longer would the Senate be that different kind of legislative body that the founders intended. No longer would the Senate be the saucer to cool the passions of the immediate majority. So Joe Biden in 2005, when George W. Bush was the president, said, no, we got to have the filibuster. Very important, Will.
Oh, that's interesting. So in 2005, it wasn't racist. In 21, it is racist.
Correct.
I think I can do you one better, my friend. How about in 2020? Was it racist 1 year ago? Well,
couldn't have been.
Let's look at usage of the filibuster 1 year ago. Oh, look at that. 327 times by Democrats was the filibuster used, once by Republicans. Things sure do turn racist
I've never
fast,
seen that stat.
Jedediah.
That's unbelievable. Mitch McConnell's majority leader, and it's not racist then.
I almost fell out of my chair when I saw that number, 327 times. I mean, can you guys even believe? I can't even imagine the need to use something 327 times in 1 year. Regardless, the point is valid. Either it's racist or it's not. It can't be racist conveniently when you need it to be racist so that you can get rid of it, and then suddenly it's not racist when you do need to utilize it. Political hypocrisy, I mean, make up your mind. But really, look at that, 327 times. I mean, that's just an astounding number. Regardless, Senator Tim Scott weighed in on all of this. He blasted Biden, he blasted Democrats for this flip-flop that's pretty obvious at this point based on the stats and the footage we've seen. Let's take a listen to what Tim Scott had to say.
Here's what we know about the Democrats. They were for the filibuster before they were against the filibuster. I keep asking myself, will the real Chuck Schumer please stand up? Is it the one who was for the filibuster, or is it the new one who's now against the filibuster? You did a great job, Brian, bringing to the surface President Obama and now President Biden's comments about their support of the filibuster. But now, of course, they use the word racist whenever they're trying to scare people into their corner. It has nothing to do with race, but they don't care. Winning at all cost means losing at some point.
I just want to make 2 quick points, if I might. First of all, the filibuster is a boring word and inherently a boring concept, but it's not boring in real life. It's about whether or not there will be any checks of power, on power, for one political party, in this case, the Democrats. It's one of the protection mechanisms against absolute one-party political rule. Second, when Joe Biden said during his press conference that these types of things, doing away with the filibuster or voter rights acts, are Jim Eagle, nobody knew what he was talking about. What he meant is eagles are bigger than crows. Jim Eagle is bigger than Jim Crow. Pete, what he's saying is the filibuster or voter ID is worse than 2 drinking fountains for different races. It's worse than segregation. That's what he's saying.
Of course this is steamrolling across the board. The left is moving at ferocious speed. You can't see the border. All right, even though it's wide open. We're not going to call on Fox. Don't hesitate to overturn a certified election in Iowa. H.R. 1, change elections forever. Now the filibuster. First, it was great. Just last year, it was so great, it was 300 times great. Now it's racist. And they will call you that to oppose it. It's because they have an agenda to ram through right now. It's crazy. All right, turning now to your headlines, starting with a Fox News alert. Right now, an urgent manhunt is underway after a Texas state trooper is shot on a highway. Police say the trooper is fighting for his life in critical condition. This suspect, DeArthur Pinson Jr., is considered armed and dangerous. Multiple law enforcement agencies are assisting with the manhunt. Can you say manhunt anymore? It seems like you can. The former CDC director says he believes COVID-19 came from a lab in Wuhan, China, and started spreading as early as fall of 2019. Dr. Robert Redfield's theory contradicts the fully compromised World Health Organization, which loves China's narrative, after a team of experts said the virus leaking from the Chinese lab was, quote, extremely unlikely. The WHO team made the conclusion last month after investigating the origins of COVID-19 based on information spoon-fed them by the Communist Chinese. And those are your headlines.
That's a huge story. That's huge.
Huge. It's one of those stories we said we wish we had more time to cover this morning, but we don't because there's so many stories.
Yeah. And just fascinating that now people are allowed. I try to follow the stories we're allowed to ask questions on and when we're allowed to ask those questions. Apparently now it's okay to ask those questions.
Right.
Before it was not, clearly. All right, still ahead, fighting cancel culture on campus. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is stepping up to bring free speech back to higher education. Scott Walker lays out his own battle for the soul of America. That's next.
After years of fighting for free speech as Wisconsin's governor, Scott Walker is launching a new campaign to end cancel culture in American schools.
The left started its takeover of our colleges and culture over a half-century ago. And the new administration is working to take over everything we hold dear. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for, protected, or someday we'll be telling our children and our children's children about what it was once like to live in the land of the free.
Scott Walker joins us now with more on the Young America Foundation's new objective. Governor, great to see you this morning. I was just listening there to that introduction, and I think what you said is absolutely right. This is a project that's been more than half a century in the making. I'm curious where it started. In that cut, you talked about universities. At this point, the left's ideology is so integrated into every aspect of culture, I don't know where it started and how it ends.
Well, we really are under siege here in America, and it's not just, as you were talking about, in our southern border with the border crisis. We see it in our campuses. We see it in our culture, well, as you mentioned, and increasingly we're even seeing it in our communications with the censorship from big tech. This goes all the way back to Saul Alinsky back in the 1960s. The left has had a long-term plan. We need to counter it, not just be engaged in the battles of the day, but really have a long game plan. And that's exactly what we're talking about. In fact, if people want a copy of it, yaf.org/longgame. We'll send you a free copy of that 12-point action plan. We got to take action. We got to start now. but we got to think ahead for the long game.
Okay, let's take a look at a few of those bullet points in the long game that you lay out. We'll put them up on your screen for you there. Establish a presence on each college campus in America. Hold schools accountable in court for free speech violations. Fight indoctrination in middle schools and create other programs for young students. Create a network for conservative professors and teachers. We've talked to Princeton professor Robbie George about them doing just that at the university level. You know what, Governor Walker? I think there is a sentiment among some conservatives that's fighting, and I'm not debating you on this. I'm curious, has that battleground been lost? Can you win on a battleground that has been ideologically absolutely dominated for decades, or do you just have to
taking on big odds, because that's what we did 10 years ago when the Occupy movement started, not on Wall Street, but on my street around our Capitol in Madison, where 100,000 protesters tried to intimidate us. They tried to marginalize us. They tried to ultimately recall us. But we won and we prevailed, and our conservative reforms are still working for my citizens today. The same thing holds true on our campus. Yeah, this has been decades in the making, but I'm a Reagan conservative. I'm not just a conservative because of Ronald Reagan. I'm an optimist, and I know that with the odds stacked against us, starting as early as preschool, when these kids, like my kids did years ago, get videos, they're in school, they're in college, they see media, we can counter this. We have to take a long-term approach.
Governor, let me actually lean on your experience for one more question with you. We can apply this to a current event in real life, and that is the NCAA applying pressure to South Dakota over its transgender bill that would eliminate biological males from participating in women's sports. But Governor Kristi Noem, a Republican, I think many believe, rightfully, a principled Republican, is not ready to sign that bill. Those threats for her are very real from a cultural force like the NCAA. What should she do?
She should absolutely sign it. Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas just did this. I got two nieces. To me, someone who's born a boy shouldn't be competing against girls, particularly in high school and college sports. Otherwise, why have the difference between sports?
Governor Walker, I got to run. We're up against a break, but it was great perspective and great time talking to you this morning. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
All right, more Fox and Friends straight ahead.
Who is USAA made for? It's made for him, a veteran who honorably served.
The numbers, first 182, that's how many protesters have been arrested at a Los Angeles park. They've been demonstrating against the closure of a homeless encampment for several days, costing the city $500,000 to clean up. If you've been to LA recently, it feels like the whole city is an encampment. Next, 150 gallons. That's how much paint spilled on an Orlando road. A truck accidentally dumping the paint at the corner of a busy intersection. It took several hours to clean up. I'm surprised, only several hours. And finally, $42,000. That's how much a Goodwill employee found inside donated sweaters. The Oklahoma store tracked down the person who dropped off the clothes and returned the money. The worker was given a $1,000 reward for her good deed. Jed, over to you.
Thanks so much, Pete. Remembering a hero, the funeral for Officer Eric Talley will be held in Colorado this Tuesday.
We can never thank Officer Talley or his family enough for their sacrifice, but we will not forget it. Many are alive today because of the actions of Eric Talley.
During the supermarket shooting in Boulder, Officer Talley ran straight toward the danger to save the lives of so many others. Tributes have poured in from across the country for the slain hero, who leaves behind a wife and 7 children. And now the Tunnel to Towers Foundation is doing their part to chip in. Let's bring in their CEO, Frank Stiller. Frank, thank you so much for being here. You do such fantastic work for so many people throughout the country and have for years. Tell us a little bit about Eric Talley and why it's so important to you to help the Talley family.
Well, it's so important because Eric gave his life and left behind a wife and 7 children. And for him to rush in and go towards, as you just said, towards the danger to save people, it's just incredible. So the Tunnel to Towers Foundation, you know, we've been helping first responders who died in the line of duty, their families that are left behind for years, and none more important than Eric Talley's family right now. We want to make sure that that mortgage is paid off. His mortgage is paid off by Easter. His family is very spiritual, very religious. He gave up a very good job in IT. They made a decision, him and his wife Leah, that he wanted to go into law enforcement and protect and serve. Well, you know what? We better serve him and his family right now. Go to tunneltotowers.org. You can donate as little as $11 a month. All the people come together, and this is a Fox and Friends campaign, because this is the only place I'm going to ask that we make sure that we pay off this mortgage. And Fox and Friends viewers have been phenomenal. We're already over halfway there.
Wow, so you're over halfway there, so it's important that our viewers get over to that website and help. So I want to ask you what your conversations have been like. I know you spend time talking with these families. In this particular case, what have those conversations been like, and how is the family feeling? You know, obviously the wife and 7 children. How is everyone feeling about your commitment to this cause right now?
Well, obviously, Leah is going through so much, his widow, and but nonetheless, she's relieved to know that she's not going to have a mortgage. That's a tremendous burden taken off of her. I spoke to Chief Harold, who relayed the message to the family that what we were doing, and they were overwhelmed, and they can't believe the kindness of so many people. But, you know, yesterday I was speaking to his dad, Eric's dad, Shay Talley, and I was on the phone for quite a while, and we were talking about his son. You know, he's talking about his son that he just lost, and it was a very emotional conversation, because it brought me back to when I lost my brother on 9/11. And, you know, my brother was the youngest of 7, but he was our real little brother, and we raised him. So he's as much a son to me as he was my brother. But I felt his pain, and he relayed a story which is incredible. And I asked him if it was okay if I mentioned it today on Fox. That when his son was training, Eric was training, they would say, listen, if you're in a situation, the police, and you're by yourself, you have to wait. You should wait for backup before you go in and try to help whomever. And he said to his dad, I don't know if I could do that. This is obviously before March 22nd, when he gave his life. And he goes, I don't know if I could do that, knowing that there's people that need my immediate help. And you know what? That's exactly what he did. He went right in there to save others. And it's incredible. He's an incredible hero.
Yeah, that's an incredible testimony to who he was as a person. And I know, you know, Frank, you come in and you meet these families at such distressing times. You have so much empathy from your own personal experience for what they're going through. And I know that you lift them up in times when they need it most. So thank you so much for everything that you do and for being with us today. And remember, to our audience, please go to tunneltotowers.com. Take a look, help out if you can for this amazing family that certainly needs your help. Thank you so much. .org. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen.
More Fox and Friends is coming up on the other side.
There's a word for what's happening at our border. It's insanity. Every day, thousands of migrants are racing towards our border. Yet those migrants are not running away from Border Patrol officers. They're running to the Border Patrol officers because they know, and their smugglers and their traffickers know, that they can game our asylum system. They can be released from the country in a matter of days, sometimes a matter of hours, and they will never have to go back to their home country.
GOP lawmakers touring the border yesterday, where they witnessed a shocking scene inside the child migrant facilities.
New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney just got a firsthand look herself, and she joins us now live from El Paso, Texas. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. You've been down at the border. I don't believe you were on that particular delegation, but you were on a similar one. What have you seen at the border? What's your biggest takeaway?
This is definitely a humanitarian crisis. I saw, you know, there's so many issues. We also went to the wall, the so-called barrier, because the Border Patrol has been conditioned not to use the term wall because that sounds like Donald Trump. And the reason Biden changed these policies was because they were good policies put in place by none other than Donald Trump to secure the border, to make it a humane conditions. I saw a huge overcrowding with children everywhere at the border. But I have to say, I agree with an earlier statement I saw from Lindsey Graham. What is being done to our Border Patrol to put them in such an overstressed situation to try to handle these children? It is unbelievable, the amount of compassion and the real care for these children, but trying to deal in an almost impossible situation with so many children coming across the border. And as Senator Cotton referred to, human trafficking, human smugglers are making millions off these children, and not to mention the illicit drugs. And they also told me that there were people coming from 39 different countries that they had encountered, is the term they use, coming across the border. I was at the El Paso station, which is the second largest border crossing area in our southern border. And I know where the senators were is probably the largest. I was at the second largest zone. This is a tragedy, and it's all because of the policies coming from the White House right now.
Congresswoman, not only do we see the absence of media because journalists have not been allowed to do their job and go in there and show people what's going on, but you've also had an absence of leadership there. You know, President Biden has not been there. Vice President Kamala Harris is not necessarily going there anytime in the near future. So what you see is a juxtaposition of these GOP senators who are making it their priority to go down there and show people what's going on and try to fix this, and juxtapose that with a current administration that seems largely absent on the issue. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think they really care, but I will tell you this. The Border Patrol really wants to tell us everything that's happening because they want solutions to the problem. They told us as much as they could tell us under the constraints of where the administration controls. You know, they're in power right now. This is a federal agency, and other federal agencies are working with them. You know, the Border Patrol is doing the best they can. Their job is to patrol the border, which has got blanks, inefficiencies, and we saw tons of border wall that was laying in stacks that hadn't been put together because we do not have the resource, or they've been cut off. The Biden administration, using executive order, said no, finish with the wall. We're not going to complete it, and so this is causing problems for them as well. Every place that you don't complete the wall, you cause another problem for the Border Patrol in trying to capture people that are coming across. And many of these people, people don't understand, a lot of these people are in peril. They are being in positions where if you go, it's a desert condition, it's dangerous, it's cold in some cases, it's dry, there's no water right now. So this is a real tragedy. And I think the Biden administration doesn't really care. I think their mission is to allow these people to come across the border, get into the country. Some of them, the processing is hard. Another issue that I think is really important that people don't realize is that the amount of COVID-19 positive patients is 7 or 8 times the number that you're seeing in the country already. So while the Democrats are trying to lock down our country and protect us from the COVID-19 virus, you've got these people coming in with COVID-19 and they're positive.
In the time we have left, Congresswoman, I want to ask you about this stunning, whiplash-inducing news story of hypocrisy. And that is, we've talked about Congresswoman Miller Meeks and the Democratic challenges to her certified election. There's something similar going on in New York with your election. Tell us about what's going on with your seat in Congress.
The Democrats are trying to raise some type of civil rights claim, which is not the case in my race. Everyone knows the longest race. I didn't get even sworn in until February 11th. What they are trying to do is overturn the election by, executive action coming from the DOJ, the Department of Justice. There is no such case. The judge in my case didn't stop with procedural evidence. We counted every legal ballot, and the Democrats finally gave up because every legal ballot was counted, and I kept gaining more votes. We've got to hold them accountable. This is not a civil rights issue. This is an issue. I hate to compare it to the border because it's such a humanitarian crisis. But if you're going to put people in government in such a difficult position where they can't do their jobs, you're going to have chaos. And the kind of chaos, the vote trafficking that we saw from the Democrats in my race and what they're trying to do with H.R. 1 is another kind of trafficking that they're engaging in that is putting an undue and unfair stress on our system, and it will undermine our democracy.
Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We're going to turn to some headlines for you now this hour. New Hunter Biden texts reveal the Secret Service was involved in the 2018 missing gun case. Biden writing in part, when the police, the FBI, the Secret Service came on the scene, she said she took it from me because she was scared I would harm myself. The president's son says his late brother's wife threw the gun in a garbage can behind a Wilmington, Delaware grocery store. The White House maintains the Secret Service was not involved. And 3 Florida officers are hailed as heroes for saving a woman's life after her car overturned in a pond. After losing control of her car and crashing, the woman reportedly called 911 as water flooded her car. All 3 officers were quick to respond, diving into the water to help. They were able to open the passenger door and get the woman out as water filled the vehicle. She went home uninjured. And check this out, NASA's Orion spacecraft doing its best cannonball as it completes its first water drop test. The 11-foot capsule dropping into a giant tank of water at a Virginia facility to prepare for future moon missions. Researchers say the test is to stimulate different landing scenarios in real-life conditions. NASA says the moon mission could happen as soon as November. Those are your headlines.
There we go. Cool.
Cool.
That's it.
we have a lot on that.
Rick, you're cool, too.
Wow, that's the excitement about going to the moon nowadays? That's like all
I
we
was going to say, like,
cool.
we've been there in the
We've done
60s. Like, come on. Been there, done that. Talk to me about more.
There you go.
Raise the bar.
All right, I'll talk to you about. All right, guys, some more severe weather coming. This is a look at the averages of tornadoes per month. We're already above our average that you would normally see in a typical March. We've had a lot of activity. When we do see activity in March, this is generally where it is. A lot of areas of the Deep South, and we have another threat of that again today. So be very, very careful. It's going to be areas, say, around the Memphis area over towards Nashville. This morning, you're waking up just fine. We do have some really strong storms that are beginning to build in the area of Tennessee, and that is going to be the start of it. So first we have the storms, then we start to see a little bit of a break, and then we have more storms come back. So these storms this morning are not the main event, but we'll watch for this area, potentially some strong tornadoes, and across some pretty populated areas as well. All right, guys, back to you.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. All right, coming up, Minnesota's new social studies standards, they used to be civics, now they're social studies, facing backlash for including concepts like systemic racism in first grade. Dr. Carol Swain on the Indoctrination at length reminded me how wise you are on these issues. We want to get your take on this as well. Here's part of the benchmarks from first grade. We mentioned first grade. I'm going to read one from first grade and one from ninth grade. It says, learn to recognize unfairness, stereotypes, and bias on the individual level and injustice at the institutional or systemic level. So that's first grade. But by ninth grade, we're bashing, get this, describe the tactics used by the U.S. government to claim indigenous and Mexican land, including but not limited to the analysis of the ideology of manifest destiny and its relationship to whiteness, Christianity, and capitalism. So, Dr. Swain, they're talking about Christianity now in schools just to bash it.
Well, true. And I think that every American should be concerned because what happens in Minnesota and California and Illinois will find its way, to your state. Yes. And it is introducing young children to complex ideas before they can develop critical thinking skills. And so clearly they're being indoctrinated, at the K-12 level. And it is a progressive agenda that advances, a secular humanist ideology. It teaches them, in many cases, about other religions, to practice other religions that go against Christianity. And I don't think we should stand by idly and allow that to happen.
That's amazing.
And we know with federalism, states can do what they want, but what's happening now is a national move.
Such a great point. Young people introduced to theories too complex for them to develop. They don't have critical thinking yet. That's the definition of indoctrination. Now, the state says this is not the curriculum yet. There'll be a review. But if this is where they're starting, certainly it's an indication of exactly where they want to go. But I got to get your take on another story as well out of Oakland. Oakland is proposing sending $500 a month to low-income residents, but only if you're black, not if you're white. So based purely on race. Here's part of the announcement that came from the CEO of it. Listen.
The Oakland Resilient Families is designed to tackle the existing racial income gap. We know that the Oakland Equity Index that families of color experience the greatest income disparities in the city. This pilot is built on a legacy. Guaranteed income has been a goal of the Black Panther platform since its founding.
So, Carol, we're so woke that now we're going back to deciding based on your race who gets money?
I hate to call people names, but I want to say that there are idiots, running these programs in these cities because it's clear to me and anyone that has looked at the law that this would be a violation of the civil rights laws that we have on the books, as well as the Equal Protection Clause. And so they can put these programs in place. They will survive until there is a lawsuit that goes before a judge that follows the law.
Scariest part is the mindset there that puts it there in the first place. What is the mindset, real quick, that justifies this sort of reverse racism?
I would just say that the colleges and universities have turned out people who can't think, and it is reverse racism. Back in the 80s, we laughed when white people said they were being discriminated against. Now we see the discrimination, and I think every American has to fight against it.
And you wrote the book on it. Dr. Carol Swain, thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead, NASCAR will look a bit different this weekend because drivers will be racing in the dirt. I want to see that. Ashley Strohmeyer is live at Bristol Motor Speedway to preview the action.